I feel greatly privileged to talk to you.
That's fine.
Not particularly on films, but on books, as it was mentioned. I would have loved to talk to you extempore, like Mr. Sachidanandan did. But then I'm used to second takes. I will explain for those who are not very familiar with filmmaking. In filmmaking, this has been my habit also. Even if I take a shot to my very best satisfaction, I'll tell the cameraman, let us go for another take. Always, this is a habit. I can't do that while I'm talking to you, because a speaker is expected to go on, with a certain continuity, and he has to be talking sense, and it has to mean something to the listener. So, as a measure of courtesy, I just wrote down something which probably is not complete. It doesn't reflect all my thoughts, but then you have to start somewhere. So I'll just read it out. Please pardon me for the tedium of listening to something being read out. All the same, since I wrote it down, it has ceased to be a talk. So I had to give it a caption. So I thought I will give it a caption like growing up with books. As I try to recall my earliest liaison with literature, those dawn to dusk Bhagavata recitals that used to be regularly held at home every fourth Sunday of a month echo back from my childhood. The readers were semi-professionals who invariably did bring a certain degree of erudition to their interpretation of the holy book penned by Tunjathu Ramanujan Eduthachen, the venerable father figure of modern Malayalam literature. The reciter's voice would choke with devotional fervor as they pour out the wondrous deeds of Narayana, the Almighty. Difficult it was to appreciate, because he would wait until the very end of many trials and tribulations to take pity on his hapless devotee, to lift him out of all earthly moorings and lead him to the heavenly abode of happiness ever after. Each stanza of the verse would be paraphrased, allusions and references annotated in perfect unison with the poetic and philosophical rendition of the pious author. It was always about life, living, and lessons in morals, as alluded through numerous parables. The stories thus told had a certain dramatic quality that would ignite the imagination of the young and the old alike. Strangely, the same stories evoked different responses in different people of different age groups. If the young among the listeners saw their fancies soaring high into the unknown, the old were jolted into searching their souls for any misdeed they have committed for worldly gains. For it is inevitable that they meet with their nemesis. Some of those stories and characters still keep lingering in my mind, leaving wonderment and unanswered questions too. The story of Ajamila's salvation is one such. Ajamila is a devout Brahmin who goes astray from his path of piety and dharma and starts leading a life of sin and carnal pleasures. He lives his merry life long enough until the age of 80 and then falls sick and is bedridden. As he lies there, waiting for his imminent death, Yama's messengers arrive to take him away. Ajamila calls out his young son, named Narayana, in mortal fear, and it works like a magical mantra. Lord Narayana himself responds to the call and sends his deputies to retrieve him from the Yamakinkaras. And that left me with a nagging doubt. What was it fair to absolve a sinner like him, even as he was mired in worldly matters and was itching for even more sinful deeds? Explanations like even a pronouncement of the name Narayana would bring salvation somehow did not quite appease my infantile mind. Fascinating indeed are some of the characters I came across in the Bhagavata tales. Parikshit, Prahlada, Dhruva, Yayadi, and an array of dramatic characters, noble, heroic, and complex at once. Then it was time for school. Mere passive listening gave way to active reading. A period of direct contact with letters, the printing ink, the smell and rustle of coarse but fresh paper. Whatever that was printed was final and unquestionable. Wisdom and knowledge got condensed in mellifluous Malayalam letters. It was also a time for many discoveries and many a disillusionment. One of the faculties I regret not having is the ability to commit poems to memory. But then surprisingly, I still can recall a couple of lines from my primary school text. പുല്ലുകൊണ്ടും ഉപകാരമുണ്ടാം തൻ്റെ പല്ലുകൾ തേപ്പാൻ കൊള്ളാം മെല്ലവേ കർണങ്ങളിൽ ഇട്ടുടൻ തിരികിയാൽ തെല്ലു സൗഖ്യമുണ്ടാകിൽ ആവിധത്തിലും കൊള്ളാം. A rough translation would be, even a blade of grass has its worth. It can be used to clean our teeth. If introduced tenderly into the ears and turned softly, it can give us a certain pleasure. See how useful it can be. Today, these lines may not stand poetical scrutiny, but it was great poetry for me then, and it made a lot of sense. At that impressionable age, it taught me not to treat anyone or anything lightly. The idea contained in those simple, direct and clear couplets has been amazingly valid even to this day. For a long time, I was pretty inquisitive about the author of the piece. Our text had several such poems and worthy articles that were not particularly credited to any author. Curious as I was, and with my unqualified admiration for writers, I remember making inquiries about their source. I had wanted to tell the author how much indebted I was for the great thoughts expressed in that very simple piece. Finally, I got word that those texts for primary education were all written by one person who was an employee in the Department of Public Instruction, a scholar who had no claims to being a poet. And then I met him. Nearly 4 decades later, at a public meeting, we were both scheduled to address. He was none other than the great scholar, Dr. Suranadu Kunyampullai. When I raised the subject and quoted the lines, he said, "True, it was part of my job to write those books, but can't particularly remember those lines. Maybe I wrote them." Needless to say, I was terribly disheartened. Those were difficult days, my childhood. I can enjoy it in retrospect, only in retrospect. As it was lived, there was little that was worth relishing. Separated parents, mismanaged estates, well-to-do relations, poverty, near poverty conditions, unfair comparisons, awareness of things, ego and pride, many incongruities. But then there was one escape, the books that came my way. They were devoured. Novels, plays, poems, autobiographies, travelogues. And of all the books, one I read and reread 10 times, 20 times, 100 times. This was a small novella titled Balachandran by Karur, the celebrated short story writer. I had read everything Karur had written, even as I could not fully comprehend or appreciate them all alike. I was simply charmed and carried away by the characters and their course of life as depicted in it. It was easily the best story I had read till then, and I did not just stop at admiring it, but went about recommending it to my small circle of friends, most of whom were my seniors, as a must-read. The hero of the story was a boy named Balachandran, who happened to be of my age when the story opens. His father had died early, and his poor mother had no means to feed him or buy books for his schooling. No wonder I saw myself reflected in his character, a case of perfect empathy. Even as they lived in abject poverty, both the mother and the son knew that their salvation lay in his education and the eventual possibility of earning a job. They go through a lot of hardships, but their struggle is relentless. In the end, they succeed exceedingly well. Young Balachandran makes it to the top in his exams and gets appointed as the collector of a district. Tears well up in the mother's eyes. I am overwhelmed. This time, it is out of sheer happiness and a sense of fulfillment. Told in simple and effective language, with keen observations and a deep understanding of human nature, with an all-pervading sense of nobility, the book gave us boys a lot of hope to hold on to. We felt emboldened to carry on with our struggles. Our condition was, after all, not as hopeless as Balachandran's. In my last film, Kathapurushan, I did pay homage to Karur and his outstanding book, incorporating a whole sequence built around the book, Balachandran. This I thought I owed it to the author. And then, after I had completed the film, and as it was being shown around, there appeared an item in the newspapers with the heading, The Real Story of Balachandran. I read it in trepidation. It said that Karur was not the real author of the story. It was an unknown school teacher from Changanasheri, a small town whose name I can't recall now, who had authored it. The manuscript was bought by the Writers' Cooperative Society, of which Karur was the unpaid founder president. And it was published under Karur's name to get the ready approval of the textbook committee. An innocent and selfless act, but what a terrible letdown. You may surmise my literary encounters, as a rule, were destined to end up in disillusionment and disappointment. Far from it. It often led to simple and pure enlightenment as well. My middle school days were particularly exciting and probably taxing to my small circle of friends, as they were compulsorily treated to my poems, plays, short stories, and even travelogues. There was hardly any branch of literature I had not laid my hands on. But as I went up the classes and got to read more and more, I started having doubts and second thoughts, and my writing was already on the wane. My output was, in fact, getting inversely proportional to the quantum of my reading. I was simply awed by the enormity of the exposure these books brought upon me. The best of them were sheer lessons in human observation and the enviable craft of writing. While rich in original thoughts, they were expressed in novel ways as well. Life in its multitudinous forms, hues and colors, and in its beauty and bitterness was all there for a devout reader to explore and discover. Happily, my adolescence saw a great period of growth and flourish in my language and literature. We were witnessing quantum gems all around. Poetry was no more the be-all and end-all. The grand romantic period of our literature, as exemplified in the works of poets Ashan, Vallathol and Ullur, the trinity was soon to be sidelined by poets who did not observe either conventional meters or traditional subject matter. The new poetry did not eschew. Mr. Sachidanand will pardon me because I'm not entering his area. I'll soon come out. The new poetry did not eschew any subject or feeling as alien to poetic expression. Spiritualism was already taking a back seat, and we were entering an era of social realism. The mundane everyday life of the common man had already become respectable material for fiction. The growth and flourish of two comparatively new branches of literature, short story and the novel, were assuming abstract virility. They were unabashedly questioning traditions. After all, they had been born out of man's perceptions of a fast-changing world and a sensibility all new. There already was a group of young writers in the forefront who had got inspired by the new literary trends set in motion by Maupassant, Chekhov, and others. They, in fact, had their initiation to world literature under the tutelage of the visionary Kesari Balakrishna Pillai. Happily, it was about the same time that we started translating from other Indian languages, particularly Bengali. In our ardent admiration for anything Bengali, we even went beyond the best. But then it was for the good. Our writers could sense where they stood and what was in wanting. While the rest of the literatures in India knew little of what was happening in Malayalam, we had been keeping watch of every movement, every achievement, every failure and inadequacy of our intellectual neighbors. No wonder Bankim, Sharatchandra, Vibhuti Bhushan and Bimalkar all became household names in Kerala. Even a difficult author like Rahul Sankrityayan got translated from Hindi into Malayalam, not to mention Mulkarajanand, Kishan Chandar and K. Abbas. For once, we found it was after all not a bad idea to be at the receiving end. And then it was time for giving too. Our writers learned to consider our own realities, our past and our present closely, the realities we had neglected all too long. Our sun that stood hidden behind the thick canopy of the greenery slowly showed up in streaks. Our rains that lashed across the land in 2 heavy monsoons started spraying a new faith in us. But then we looked not only at ourselves, but beyond as well. In a way, we were growing beyond our own geographical confines and becoming Indian in faith and international in our longings. Whether it is acknowledged or appreciated is simply another matter. I have often wondered, what is it that makes a book more popular than the rest? Why do I, for instance, prefer a particular book to the others? It is the content and treatment that really matter, one may say. But what makes it popular among the readers is something else. Each book has a personality, like its authors, but independent of him. If I like reading a book a second time, I take that as an indication of its affability. If I enjoy the book less the second time, it is just about average. If I relish it more a second time, it should be a good book. If the book lends itself to several readings and meaningful experiences, it should be treasured as outstanding. It is not uncommon that once in a long while, one comes across a book that can radiate different vibrations in you at different times, at different stages of your growth and experience. In short, the work comes to assume a property and proportion that can be described only as epical. Vaikom Muhammad Bashir is the author of several such modern epics. Fatima's Goat, My Grandpa Had an Elephant, Childhood Playmate. These novels have no parallel in Malayalam literature, not in any literature that I know either, any other. They had been unique in their feel and appeal. There is no meaning in comparing them with those in other languages, for they do not lend themselves easily to English or other languages. What makes it difficult to translate Bashir is that he wrote in a vocabulary, diction, and style that he created for himself. The intensity of his experience and the subjectivity of his vision could not be expressed in other form or manner. I must confess here, as you could easily guess, I am a die-hard admirer of Bashir. And in fact, my film Mathilukal, The Walls, was my personal tribute to his genius and humanity. Incidentally, I am reminded of a small incident related to my filming of this story. Once I was returning home from Delhi. On the flight to Bombay, I happened to meet a writer and filmmaker of repute. And we were cordially chatting on a variety of inconsequential subjects. I had incidentally told him that for the first time I was adapting a story of Vaikom Muhammad Bashir. And I simply could not believe his response. He asked me innocently, "Is this Bashir you are talking about a real good writer?" Oh no. This cultivated, well-informed intellectual of a writer from my neighborhood did not know anything about our great writer Bashir. How about the ordinary mortals? No wonder. The Jnanapith committee never thought it fit to honor him. Nor did any intellectual of this country propose Bashir for the Nobel. Am I already sounding parochial? On the contrary. The real big problem about a Malayali is that he wants to sound international. When the Malayalam translation of 100 Years of Solitude went into several editions, a joke attributed to writer N.S. Madhavan made its rounds. He commented, the most popular Malayali writer of the year was Marquez. Bashir was a class all by himself. But then, there also were other outstanding writers I admire and love going back to. Tagadi, Changampuja, Urup, Karur, Ponkundam Varki, S.K. Puttakkad, Parapuram, Keshadev, C.J. Thomas, G. Shankara Kurup, Vailopulli, N. Krishnavalle, G. Shankarapulli, and Thopil Bhasi. They have all influenced me in my understanding of the world and its inhabitants. My problem is that I have not stopped being influenced. I keep myself open, and I have this strange feeling that in turn I am influencing the writing in my language as well, in whatever small measure it be. For the writer does not anymore operate in isolation. His most direct influences today are cinema and television. The visual and the audio effects have affected the writer positively. He does not anymore engage himself in routine descriptions of people and places. Look at any new writing, it is all too evident. I am deliberately holding back the titles of contemporary Malayalam writing and its authors for the fear of leaving out some while mentioning a few. The last decade saw some of the finest pieces of writing in poetry, short story, and the novel. Perhaps the only area where we lagged was theatre. The short story, one can say without any constraint, has already reached the very zenith of accomplishment, and it can compare favorably with anything written in its genre anywhere in the world. I have always felt privileged that I could make contact with worthwhile writing in the rest of India and also the rest of the world in my own language. I do not think my friends in the neighboring states can claim the same. All the same, it must be admitted that while a story written in one Indian language should lend well in translation to another, the experience is not the same with a foreign tongue. There have been several instances of poor and unworthy translations even among European languages. Milan Kunderas is a case in point. He writes in the author's note to the 1992 edition of his book, The Joke. If it didn't concern me, it would certainly make me laugh. This is the fifth language version of the joke, English language version of the joke. He disowns all the four earlier editions and promises the readers there will not be a sixth English language version. While in the university, all my early ambitions being pinned on theatre, I started on plays, and all my reading was limited to them. English originals and those translated from other languages. I knew I had to specialize and sharpen my craft. So I started not with trends, but with authors. Some of them may sound very oldish. Got hold of the complete works of Bernard Shaw, Galsworthy, J.B. Priestley, O'Neill, Pirandello, Ibsen, Tennessee Williams, Thornton Wilder, Bertolt Brecht, Chekhov, Edward Albee, John Shangokto, Ionesco, Jean Genet, Samuel Beckett. Strange, I have already forgotten some of my favorite playwrights. And all those studies written on those authors. My pursuit of plays and playwrights continued through my Film Institute days. I think the best modern playwright after Ibsen and Brecht is Samuel Beckett. And the best play after The Doll's House and The Mother Courage and Her Children is Waiting for Godot. Nora's banging the door behind her resounded through Europe at the turn of the century. The mother came to personify the courage and tenacity of humanity. And the waiting of Vladimir and Estragon, joined by Lucky and Poso in Waiting for Godot, tells upon the futility and absurdity of everything, living, loving, hoping, and even waiting. This play also happens to be the last stage play I produced from a remarkable Malayalam version by my poet friend Kadamanita. And then, having made the choice of a different pursuit in cinema, I read less and less theatre and more fiction in English during the last 3 decades or so. I had to make up for lost time. Some of the authors I am comfortable with are, you have already guessed, at least one of them, Milan Kundera, Marquez, Mishima, Yasunari Kawabata, Okri, Gundar Gras, Kotsi, Naipal, R.K. Narayan, Anandamurthy. Among the young are Jumba Lahiri, Arundhati Roy, Upamanyu Chatterjee, Jayashree Mishra. The list is not exhaustive though. Every time I am seen with a book, people ask me, is it a novel? Are you going to film it? I would simply say no and tell myself, can't I read a book just for the pleasure of reading? The pleasure that a good book can impart is indeed unique. There is no substitute for it. It converses with you personally, secretly, warmly, and intimately. It lets you be yourself, the other person, and yet another, and several at the same time. You can't ask for more. At the end of this introspection, I am left with a nagging feeling that I haven't read enough, particularly English fiction. I haven't read Amitabh Ghosh, Rohindan Mistry, Salman Rushdie, and what a shame, and a whole lot of Indian writers writing in English. Not because I am prejudiced against them, but simply because I couldn't find the time. Let me promise myself I shall try and catch up. Of late, I have this very strange problem. However much I wish, I cannot go from one book to another. The professional filmmaker in me starts admonishing, are you being fair to yourself? Can you afford this luxury? Isn't it so many years since you made your last film? This is an ongoing struggle, without one side ever taking over the other. It is little appreciated that cinema is a jealous mistress. It wants all your attention to itself all the time, even when you are simply not engaged in the making of it. In an easy chair and an engaging book does make you sit back and laze for too long. All that talk about hibernation is just excuses to dream others' dreams. Thank you.
If my friend does not mind, maybe for about 10 minutes we could afford a few questions. Questions which should be, of course, pointed and related in some way to the talk, the comments he made on books. Of course, it can be also related to his films. And I would like some of you to ask this question. Yeah, sure.
It has been said that you are the successor to Satyajit Ray. And Satyajit Ray made films in Bengali, but he made two Hindi films, Shatranj Ke Khiladi and Sadgati. And both were taken from Munshi Premchand's stories. I would like to ask you, sir, you mentioned Urdu writers and some Hindi writers, Bengali writers. I would like to know, what about Premchand? You never mentioned him. And second, Waiting for Godot. It's a different matter. I taught it at a university for 10 years, the play. But it was translated into Kashmiri, and I'm a Kashmiri. It was presented in Kashmiri in Srinagar 12 years ago, 13 years ago, I don't know exactly. But it can't be presented there anymore. The circumstances have changed. And Waiting for Godot, when it was presented to the prisoners in Sing Sing jail, in English, of course. Beckett wrote it in French, but it was translated he was in Paris. When it was presented to 10,000 prisoners in America, in Sing Sing jail, they all acclaimed it. They were just ordinary prisoners. They were not educated. They didn't have university. They said, it is about us. So when you said that you regard Waiting for Godot as one of the best plays of modern times, I agreed with you entirely, sir. But what about Premchand and Sadgati and Shatranj Ke Khiladi? Thank you.
Ray has already made those films.
Yeah.
Leaving no scope.
You are his successor. I also regard you as his successor.
Yes. No, it has been translated in Malayalam, of course.
All the major works of writing.
Premchand has been translated into...
Everything he wrote, practically everything he wrote. Because
As I told you at that tea session, that I know one great professor of English from Trivandrum, Professor Elippathayam. And when I met him for the first time at Mysore, he said, "You are from Kashmir. What about bandization?" He wanted to about the folk theatre, and I couldn't tell him about funk. I knew about it. I have seen bandization, and others are doing it. ML Kembu and others are. Okay. I don't want to take your entire time. There are others.
Anybody else?
And in adopted tongues. I know about Beckett. He's Irish. He was born and bred up in Dublin, but he went to France following James Joyce. And he started writing in French, which he knew. He was asked, "Why are you Englishman or an Irishman? Why are you not an Englishman? Why are you writing in French?" He said, "I want to discipline myself. If I start writing in English, Irish and English, then I would go off by track. But French is a different medium, and it disciplines me." And he wrote his plays and his novels in French, which were later translated into all kinds of languages, including Kashmiri. Okay, I don't know. I want your opinion about that.
So I think one should write in his mother tongue.
Yeah, of course, I agree.
Yes.
I agree with that.
Have you any plans to make a film on Baligal Saki?
No. Already a bad film was made.
A bad
on
film?
it. Yes.
By whom?
I don't remember.
One should not name him.
No, then
Somebody who made a
Quite a bad film was made.
No, but then you can have an improved... like Shakuntala, so many people have made Shakuntala under the name Stree, Vagera.
Actually, I have not done many adaptations. My whole career I have adapted only 2 stories. One was Bashi's and the other was by another writer, younger writer.
Sir, what does these good books make a commercially successful films?
No, it depends on how you make it.
By your experience.
No, I don't think it has anything to do with the commercial success. If you make all kinds of compromises, you become commercially successful. If you don't, it's very difficult.
So one can't survive then.
Yeah.
So it means the good books remain showpiece only.
No, books should remain as books. Why should they be filmed? Being filmed is not its salvation.
But in the modern...
In fact, when authors argue with the filmmakers that their story has been spoiled, it has been done, mutilated, this and that, it's absolutely wrong argument. They have a greater life in the book. Why should they worry about a translation or an imitation or poor imitation? Why should they worry? If they consider that filming the story is the ultimate thing, then it is a different case. I think it's a wrong attitude for the writer to take.
In the Indian context, the classic case
Excuse
is
me.
of...
So you said that the work of a novel or short story lies in its content, but
I didn't say that.
no, it came in your talk in some way or the
Is it
other.
content and also manner?
But what I want to ask you is, by selecting a particular short story for translating on the screen, do you think some extraneous consideration would prevail, considering the unpredictable mood of the audience and considering the fact that the film industry is speculative in nature?
No, it depends on the caliber of the filmmaker. What he is going to do with the material. He can make a very bad film out of a great novel. He can make a great film out of a very ordinary novel too. This has been happening. Look at Hitchcock, Every time he adapted a story, they were just ordinary stories. Then he made them into great films. Those books wouldn't be remembered for their worth.
So in other words, perhaps you are implying that it's a director's medium. He can do whatever. I mean, he can really give the right effect to a very mundane subject or to a very small matter.
No, see, the writer operates at the inspirational level. If the writer inspires me, then I can go on, to make the film. What I personally do is I internalize it and I start pretending that it is my own story. That's how I make the films. If I think that I owe a certain allegiance to this or that, then I will end up making a second-grade copy. I don't do that. So if somebody says that it is not faithful, well, that's not my intention, to be faithful to the letters.
I have a very small question. You have laid down a golden rule about the value of books, and the more times you read it, and it still gives you insights, and you can grow with a book. That book you would call one of the greatest. Would you say the same rule would apply to cinema as well?
Cinema also, yes, absolutely. There are films which are just 1 year, 2 years old, and they look at it and it looks old. There are films which were made for 50 years back and they look very fresh. Yes, it has that quality. Any work of art, it has that quality.
Sir, could you comment on it? As far as my personal perception is concerned, I regard a film very good film if I have tears in my eyes. Otherwise, the film doesn't make much sense.
No, see, each one has different approaches.
Yeah.
See, see, the film, in my opinion, an ideal work of art doesn't tell you everything, directly. It doesn't give you in a plain form. It is in the mind of the perceiver. Even a film, even a book, in all these cases, the medium disappears. It works on your mind. Also it depends on your expectations, your intellectual level, your emotional level, your background, your reading, your understanding of the world. So many things. It depends on that. A film of mine will appeal to a school boy in a way different from a mature man's. The responses are different because they are of different experiences. They have different experience levels behind them. So, it can be very different. The same film can make different appeals. Only the commercial film, which has absolutely no internal life, it has only the exteriors, it will appeal to everyone alike. It will be forgotten also alike. It doesn't leave any lasting impression on you.
When we generalize,
Because it is trying to please everybody. It is trying to please the child, it is trying to please the teenager, it is trying to please the mothers, everyone. Illiterates, literates.
The fact is that most of the films make us weep, really, because
Yeah.
because of their poor
Yes.
quality.
Yes.
Charlie Chaplin made us laugh, and he still makes us laugh, and we enjoy it.
No, towards the end of his life, he couldn't make anybody laugh. Not even his financiers. Yeah. No, that's not the end of everything. That is one genre of filmmaking. Nobody else is succeeding in that. Will anyone make films like Chaplin now? You are looking at it in a very different light today. Chaplin's comedy is also added because when it was shot on 16 frames per second. That was the speed of the camera. Now you are watching the film at 24 frames. So it has this jumpy quality. A comedy which is not intended originally is added to it. We don't realize this. And most of the time the music was played separate. No, it was not on the film. So with every show, it was an independent show. So later they added soundtrack. They couldn't afford to play the orchestra along with the film all the time. So sometimes we can be terribly disillusioned about some films of Chaplin. In fact, Chaplin used to spend days and days, waiting for inspiration. After he became famous and popular, the studio will engage him. He was working for the others, and he will wait for inspiration for days together, and nothing will come out. And he will shoot something, halfway he will throw it away. what happened was, all the best ones have been shown around, we have seen it. Then they found that the Chaplin cells. So what they did was, from the waste paper box, all the rubbish was collected, and they said the unseen Chaplin. You see them, they are very bad. This happens to authors also.
Unseeable chaplain.
They are unseeable chaplains. This happens to even authors. Some authors don't want to publish certain thing, and then they stack it away somewhere from the sight of everyone. So when they are either they are in bed or when they are dead and gone, somebody dishes it out and publishes it, and it is so embarrassing to read that.
It's like unpublished chapters of a book.
Not like that. Something that you don't want to share it with the others. It's obscene, in fact. Obscene.
Sir, apart from your narrative films, which inspired you to make documentaries? It is your social commitment or any political constants which hurts you or penetrates you?
No. See, I have not made any activist films. I have not. Most of my films, documentaries I have made, they are on performing arts. I always enjoyed making them, because to make those films, even if the film is of 20 or 30 minutes, the study that you do, extends over so many months, and that study itself is very rewarding. So I have personally enriched myself a lot, experience-wise, making those films. Maybe all my the effort that has gone into may not be in the film now, because the subject is in a certain way limited by the length and other restrictions. The last documentary, in fact, I did this, it is not going to be seen by anyone, but then I did a lot of study. That was a digital video film on Kodiyettam. I did 10 hours of shooting. This was the very first time somebody is shooting inside a real Kuthambalam. Many of you may not know, Kodiyettam is the oldest living theatre in the world. Even within India, people do not know this. They talk about Greek theatre, which had only a past and no present. But then Kodiyettam is being performed for the 2000 years continuously. Yeah. You did not know this. You have been teaching, waiting for Godot. This is the problem. So for me also it was great education making this film. And I wanted to see, very interesting, this was particularly a project that UNESCO wanted to examine. They wanted to preserve the heritages that are being lost. And then one of the things that we had, one of the proposals was about Kodiyettam given to UNESCO. So they wanted to see what this performing art is like. That's how I came to make this digital film. So it is very important for our own people in our own country to know about our own theatre. Our texts have been very, very wrongly, badly written, with a lot of big omissions. And Kodiyettam was being performed in other parts of India long back. Somehow, it came to be treasured and preserved in Kerala. So if you look at the dress of Kodiyettam and it is Sanskrit theatre. Language spoken is Sanskrit. So if you can spend time on studying these things, you will find that the Brechtian theory and so many things that we talk about, they are nothing new to the Indian mind.
So can you share some of your most thrilling experience and most disappointing?
Very few thrills and very many disappointments.
One if you can.
It's very difficult.
And disappointing one.
This will make you weep like you want to do at the films.
How it is died.
I don't want.
Well, that last question would have been the final question of any interview. So this is time for Thanksgiving. Indeed, formally, I should thank Adoor for a wonderful presentation. In fact, being a speech by a filmmaker, I did not expect that it would have been so moving and so lyrical and so rich and rewarding. Because speech, he had told me that, well, speech is not my medium. But I found that, and all of us have found that it was a profound kind of response to the world of books. And very much like his films, most of his films are very much region specific and time specific, and still they are some of the most universal films ever made in the world. And the same quality we found also in his presentation, that he was speaking mostly about the books in Malayalam, mostly about the way he grew up with books. But with all that, they also appealed to us, and most of us were also reminded of our own childhood, our own growing up, the books we are familiar with the books we have befriended. And so this is perhaps the quality of any true and genuine artist, to be very specific to his time, very honest to his the place where he grew up, the language in which he grew up, and still and through that to reach out to a very large audience, perhaps reach out to the world, being local, and at the same time, through being local, to be global. So if you take some of the best writers in any of the Indian languages, you will find they combine this quality. They are extremely regional, extremely specific when it comes to details, and at the same time, they have this kind of a universal appeal. So Adoor, like in his films, I believe that in his today's presentation also has reflected this quality of being local, and through being local, of being universal. I thank him for his presentation. I thank all of you for the questions you asked, which I think enlivened the evening. Otherwise, it would have been poorer. It also brought out some extremely rewarding responses from Adoor Gopalakrishnan. So for this, I thank you for the questions. I thank Adoor for the beautiful talk and the very sharp responses to the questions. I believe it has been an extremely illuminating evening. Thank all of you, and I thank my friend Adoor for this evening.